think that religion here at Community Church is made relevant. We are in the tradition of liberal religious churches everywhere. We're passing modern concerns through the filter of our values, finding ways to live as grounded, spiritual, ethical, 21st century New Yorkers, right? Religion has to speak to the concerns of our very real lives, which is why all week I've been questioning my decision to talk today about the fall of Rome using a voice of a 5th century doctor of the church. And yet, I apparently did not reverse course, so here we go. The fall of Rome is difficult to pinpoint. There are important dates historians use, but there really isn't a single event or even a definitive time we can say that Rome no longer existed. In fact, it still exists, both within Italy and in some part as an independent nation called Vatican City. It split in the 3rd century, was diminished in the 4th century, collapsed in some recounts in the 5th century, and declined over time in separate stories of East and West until almost vanishing. Most accurately, we can say Rome fell over and over again, each time succumbing to its own faults and failures, unable to recapture its proudest moments. At its height, the Roman Empire ran from the Atlantic Ocean to the Euphrates. It covered all of Europe, moved deep into the Middle East, and the whole north of Africa. They valued education, art, philosophy. They built bridges, massive systems of roads, decreased war, increased financial stability, and earned themselves the title Pax Romana, time of Roman peace. The dismantling of that massive historic empire took time. I mean, there were invasions, but that's not how the empire fell. They fell because they got cocky. They stopped trying so hard. They spent money on parties and not on roads. They looked to enslave more people rather than do work for themselves, resulting in labor shortages and then an increase of poverty and larger discrepancies between those who have and those who don't. Politicians were more corrupt. Systems were less stable. Infrastructure was deteriorating, and no one was willing to spend the time or money for the upkeep. So by the time invaders showed up, the empire was a shadow of its old self, and governments were easy to upend. You could blame the Visigoths, but they were just part of the story. I loved this introduction to Augustine of Hippo. Loved. That was fabulous. He was, as you now know, an African bishop, a prolific writer. He lived through this time. He wrote a book called The City of God, in which he reflected on what it felt and looked like to witness the fall of an empire. Using his political realities as primary text, Augustine observed that there were two worldviews, two ways of framing our lives. And these two visions were leading his people in opposite directions. He called them the city of man and the city of God. So I'm going to translate his observations to language that we might understand better. But interestingly, his experience 1,600 years ago actually seems relevant even this far out of context. His essential insight is that we have two choices. One is to concern ourselves with ourselves, and you can see in his own life that was a path he took. And the other is to concern ourselves with the community, a path he later grew into. One is to constrict our circle of concern, what he calls the path of selfishness, and the other is to expand, what he calls the path of God, or that of love. Now, sometimes empires need to fall. I am not ready to think about either the necessity or the advantage of the fall of Rome or the American empire, but I am curious about the state of being when collapse begins. Before the roads are unfixable, before the economy is unrecognizable, before the vandals have sacked the city, there's a soft start. And that's where I'm looking. I'm looking at the regular people who got comfortable and forgot that an entire empire of peace requires intention, engagement, active citizenship. And those are the people Augustine is looking at also, because he too sees the average person as being more responsible for what was happening than most of us imagine ourselves to be. We look at power. We look at the people who are at the top of the hierarchy, the people with the money. But it's the culture of the people who hold them up that really defines the larger system. What we value, how we live, what we want and accept translates directly and is made manifest in the government and financial systems and structures that hold us up. As Unitarian Universalists, our most immediate faith directive in this context is to put love at the center of everything. Our denomination recently articulated this as a way for us to understand our lived and living theology. Love at the center. Like Augustine's city of love, this concept is both an observation and a directive, ushering us into a way of being with and for each other. It is also at the core of our theology. Our theological ancestors grounded their faith in their covenant. It was relational. Their theology was both explained and lived through the promises they made to be in community, to be accountable, to be church with one another. The members of this church in particular have been committed both to each other and to inspiring and creating and sustaining profound and radical community in our city. Our faith formation, our deepening of our faith happens in conversation and authentic relationship with each other and the work we do in the world. In light of the historic need for love to be at the center, I've been asking myself how to love well in this time and place. How, given everything happening in the world, everything happening in the country and in this city, everything happening even in this church, how do I love well? I even posed the question to some staff this summer, how do we become love? And I don't mean we as the people who are in that room. I mean we in this room. We in the rooms of all the people who are watching from home, the people who have been part of this larger congregation. How do we become love? With fear nipping at our feet. This is the challenge of the ages. And we know that because Augustine was asking a similar question in the north of Africa 1,600 years ago. It's the question of people not willing to give up or give in to the panic of massive change, the selfishness too often inspired by anxiety, the fear of losing or not getting, or of our safety being threatened in a real or perceived way. How can I counter the impulse to contract and instead find a way to expand? How can I serve the larger world and not just myself? How can I put love at the center of my life, my actions, my thoughts, my intentions? And how can we do that in community, in this time and place? Augustine writes, we are commanded to love with our whole heart, with our whole mind, and with all our strength. It is toward love that we should be led, and toward love that we should lead others. We are responsible for ourselves, our actions, our intentions, our impact. We are also responsible for bringing others along, not with criticism, but with great affection, with kindness and generosity. None of us are now, nor will we ever be perfect. And I demonstrate this daily for all the world to see. I apologize frequently for my missteps. I don't think that I or you will do this flawlessly. I'm not really even sure we can do this well. But I'd love to see us try to take seriously the task of living love, of following love, of leading others to love, if only by example. That's the human challenge, the great work of our time. When the structures around us begin to give way, there's a human impulse to protect ourselves and those closest to us. The circle is very small, and we constrict our sights largely to those we can't live without. Everyone else is on their own. We become greedy, selfish. We hoard masks during a pandemic, or drive by someone struggling with a flat tire, or stay home during a Black Lives Matter protest because I'm white, it's not my problem. I have what I need. Let them, all of the thems out there, let them figure it out for themselves. And we justify this behavior with blame, with oversimplification of the problem, with detachment and indifference. None of these responses are the responses of love. None of these promote greater life for the most people. None of these build strong, healthy communities. And when these are the values embodied by governments, they lead to corruption, to selling the access of the office to foreign nations, of using power for personal advantage. When we allow and accept these constrictions of concern, we set the stage for our own collapse. Headlines over the last few weeks here in the city include New York's top cop to resign over corruption probe. Firm run by top New York City official's brother, focus of bribery inquiry. FBI seized New York City school chancellor's phones. New York City mayor served with more grand jury subpoenas. Mayor faces crisis as federal investigation reaches inner circle. Here in New York, there are ongoing investigations into a massive bribery scheme, selling favor to the Turkish government and selling access to the Chinese government. Each person, if they are guilty, has chosen self-interest and some form of gluttony, even though they place themselves in positions of service and community concern. Putting love at the center is never easy, but it's even more difficult when our institutions are cracking. And institutions do that when we normalize selfishness, and the people we rely on to maintain the moral center are themselves seduced by fear and greed. And this is why groups of us spent time this summer thinking about how we shift our own norms to live into the promise, the vision of love at the center of everything. We wondered aloud about what tools, what assets we already have that will help us do this. We named our activism, our rooted rituals, our art making, our social circles, our comfort with imperfection, our mission, and the trust we are building and nurturing, among a whole lot of other things. We have what we need to shift our ways of being. We are able to normalize a new culture, if only in this community. We can ourselves be the city of love. And love in this case is not a feeling. It's a way of being together, a way of fashioning the world, a way of responding to each other, of welcoming, of centering relationship in equity and accountability. Covenant is about our commitment to each other and our shared mission. It's how we say we are in, that we will make room, that I am for you and you are for me. Over time, we're hoping this will bring us to a community of communities where people are activated and behave less as consumers and more as citizens, circling an active, alive, profoundly spiritual, values-driven church. This is our hope and our work for this church year. I mean, it's my hope, and it's my hope for every church year, so let's not kid ourselves. This is not new, but this year we're going to try and be more intentional about it. We altered our liturgy on Sunday as the center of our shared lives. We've decentered the offering and added the pastoral prayer and candle lighting. We've moved the clergy off to the side, put the chalice in your sight instead. The choir is physically closer. Maybe sometimes they'll come sit with everyone else. The children begin in the room with us, part of our worshiping community. Anthony's making coffee for us every week. We're hoping everyone will linger after worship. We've added this love in action table, giving us all access to shared works of justice, putting our faith to work. So before the sermon ends, I'm going to make one more observation. The crumbling of the empires and using love to hold them up isn't just for Rome or the United States or New York City. This is real in our own lives. And as we and our loved ones age, I spent yesterday moving my mother-in-law out of her home of 47 years and into assisted living. This woman is a powerhouse. Had 4 boys at home. It was always loud. Even when it was just her, it was always loud. And now it's not. She is diminishing. She's vanishing like we all do eventually. And the same way we do for an empire, we do for each other. We wrap ourselves around our beloved to hold the crumbling pieces together. It is the city of love writ small, or maybe writ large, maybe as large as love can be. Augustine notes that 2 loves made 2 cities, the love of self and the love of God. Love of God is love of the whole, love of the people, love at the center of our decisions, our concerns. Love of God is love of the good, love outside the self, love of the world. The city of God, the city of love, is where we hold each other closely, affectionately, kindly, where we make choices that provide the most good for the most people. Not an abstract God, but the love of God who brings balance, even when we are feeling tossed about by fear and change. Even if the city, the empire, might feel like it might crumble around us, we can together wrap ourselves around it and hold it up with love.